Hey guys, today I just want to go over my Linux progression and how I got my start in computer science. A bit more abstract, not as technical, not as planned out as some of my other videos, so if this isn't the kind of content you like, feel free to click off. If you want to hear about that, maybe you're thinking about trying Linux out or you're wondering about computer science, I hope that this helps. Maybe you can relate to it. So when I started university and even in high school, I didn't really think about computer science too much. I didn't really like it. I had a tiny 11-inch laptop that I used almost exclusively for writing essays, but I went to one of the quote-unquote specialized public high schools in New York City, so it was very tech and science focused, and we had to take, I believe, 2 semesters mandatory of computer science to graduate, and then you could take another 2 semesters if you wanted to. But at the time, I was like, oh, I'm going to go into medicine. I'm glad that I have this exposure to it, but it's not really for me. But after graduating, I had a semester of HTML and CSS, Python, and intro to CSS, which was mainly theory, and I believe we used something similar-ish to Scratch, but a little bit more like command written focus, less graphical. And at the end, I didn't really like it, but looking back, I think that was mainly due to how small my laptop was. Just trying to work on that little screen was pretty frustrating, and because I already thought I knew what I wanted to do, I just didn't really bother with it too much, which is one of my regrets. But when I went to university, I started as biomedical engineering. So luckily I was taking all of the same engineering courses that you would need for computer science. I was taking physics, calculus, statistics, all those good things. But the second semester of my sophomore year, I decided to pivot on a dime. I woke up extra early, was getting ready for classes. I'd been thinking about doing computer science, but I wasn't 100% sure. And I just took out my phone, opened the class scheduling app, and switched all of my courses and emailed my advisor and just switched everything to computer science and didn't look back since. But at the time, it was very stressful. And the reason I did that is I was interning at a hospital, and I just was not enjoying my time there that much. I didn't really like the fluorescent lights. The atmosphere was, the people that worked there were really great, really smart, motivated, but it just felt too corporate almost. I don't know how to explain, but the one thing that I gathered from that is I was doing a lot of data visualization for the PhD student I was working under. And the thing that I love most about that is I could go to the library, a cafe, I could lie in bed at any hour of the day, just get my work done. And it was very liberating. It felt almost like studying, and I love to study. I love to go to the library. So that led me back to some of my computer science roots from high school. I started exploring it a little bit more, and I decided to shift. But one of the problems was trying to be a university student with an 11-inch laptop is possible, but it's pretty difficult. And luckily I saved up some money for my internship, and I went to one of my favorite stores now, which is Micro Center, and I configured the cheapest PC that I could. And one of the things that's really nice about this is, at the time, I remember, GPUs were much cheaper. It was back in 2019, I believe, maybe 2020. So there wasn't that huge shortage that we're getting right now. But if you're building a PC, you don't even need a GPU right now. You could get one of these bad boys, get a cheap CPU, get a cheap motherboard. This is overkill. 2 terabytes, that's crazy. But for 160, you can see, there's a lot of really, really great deals here. And I think you get, $20 off with an eligible motherboard. So I think your best bet is still building a PC from Micro Center. You can also get parts at Best Buy and Newegg. The reason I did this is I went to school in Ohio, and there's a Micro Center in Cleveland. So, I just went over there, got all the parts, slapped everything together. And the only thing I remember is when I was at the store, the guy was like, are you going to use Linux or are you going to use Windows? Because Windows is $130. And at the time, I was like, oh, $130. I didn't budget for an operating system. I had no idea you had to pay for that. So I was like, oh, I think I'll decide. I went back, looked into some stuff, and I decided I'd give Linux a try. And from there, I haven't looked back. I've been running Linux essentially for 3 or 4 years since. And in terms of my Linux journey, I'd say it started with Linux Mint. I really liked it, but I wasn't a huge fan of the Windows aesthetic, so I moved over to Pop! OS. And I liked it, it was close to Mac OS at the time. They didn't have the Cosmic Desktop, but there were certain things I didn't really like. I wasn't sure how to put my finger on it, but I just felt like as I got more and more advanced, maybe I took that that pill of, oh, you need to be using a more advanced distribution, which I think a lot of people fall into that. And from there I moved to Tumbleweed because I was like, oh, I want to try a rolling release distro. I heard a lot about that. Really liked it. The one thing is Zupper is it's very well made. It's very nice software, but it gets convoluted with adding a lot of repos. So from there, I was living in Korea at the time, and I got a MacBook for work. I didn't have my desktop with me. It was too big to bring, and I worked almost exclusively on my MacBook, but I had an old ThinkPad from, I think, 2010 that my dad used to have, and he just had in a box somewhere he let me use. And I was running Tumbleweed on that. I was doing a lot of my programming for classes and stuff on that, but most of my internet browsing or emailing I do on my MacBook. And then I switched over to Arch Linux on that old ThinkPad. And eventually when I came back, I ran Arch Linux on my desktop as well, but I decided to give Void Linux a try. The one thing that I felt about Arch is, you hear that it's not that stable, you hear all this stuff, and I'd say it's half true. I'd say that Arch lets you break it, but you still have to break it. And the thing with Void is it doesn't really let you break it. It feels a bit more secure, more solid, more granular, if that makes sense. And maybe that's just a projection because I was a more advanced Linux user when I was using Void, but I've been using Void Linux on my desktops for about a year and a half, 2 years. So I'd say roughly half of my Linux journey, and it just feels like a regular operating system. It doesn't feel like I'm using Linux, and by that I mean it doesn't feel like I have to work my way around the operating system to get the software that I want. Even with an NVIDIA GPU, I'd say that everything works pretty smoothly. The video recording right now, I'm able to use the NVIDIA codecs, and although it is kind of chewing up my RAM, it's a little stuttery, but not too bad. But on laptops, what I found is after giving my MacBook to one of my siblings who broke their computer, I wanted to get a thin and light, so I got the cheapest framework I could build and put Fedora on it. I tested out Arch, I tested out Void, but with the i12, it was just a bit tough to get Xorg working. And the reason I wanted to use Xorg is just because screen recording on NVIDIA, or not on NVIDIA, sorry, screen recording in general on Wayland is a bit tough. I got GNOME working perfectly, but the video recording was a little hard, and going through the forums, digging through everything, I couldn't find a solid solution. And the other thing is I really enjoy using window managers from time to time, even just as a fun passion project. And without Xorg, I couldn't get that working. So instead of fighting the hardware, especially because I had the desktop that I could play with and configure however I wanted, I figured I'd just use Fedora. It's what Linus Torvalds used, the creator of the Linux kernel. And, I haven't looked back. I really, really like it. I'd say it combines the best of OpenSUSE with the best of like Pop! OS, if that makes sense, where it feels more advanced, but you still have this very, very solid, solid defaults. I'd say I'd kind of place it between the two. And that's why if I had to recommend 3 distributions from least to most advanced, I'd say Fedora, Void, and Arch. And I'd say Void is less advanced than Arch purely because it's harder to break. Not that Arch is easy to break, but you can do it. And if you're beginning your Linux journey, I'd say stay away from it at first, but nothing comes close to Arch for discovering software, really understanding your operating system, unless you're doing something like Gentoo, but in my mind, you're just wasting time compiling. And maybe that's just a cope, because I tried to install Gentoo a few times, but I was able to get it up and running, but there were always some package conflicts, and the experience just wasn't that great, so I went back to Void Linux. And the last thing I want to touch on is window managers or desktop environments. I'd say like the Batman and Robin would be xfce and awesome window manager. And I just love the Lua aspect of it, because from using NeoVim, I really enjoy Lua, and I feel like it's a great embeddable, configurable language. And by configurable, I mean it works really well as configs. I hate when a program has just a .conf file. I like that you can interact directly with the API in a very nice language. I used Sway for a little bit, and I did like it, but again, with the configuration file, I wasn't a huge fan, and I used DWM, but the only issue is patching was a bit annoying. Sometimes you had to manually patch, and to get the exact look and behavior, because I get very specific with how things look sometimes, I couldn't quite get there without one patch affecting another, and then if there was an update, I'd have to redo the whole process, so I just figured I'd stick with Awesome. And then for xfce, it's very light, it's very clean, and mainly it's very configurable. Like the look I've got with these, I think it's sweet candy icons. It's kind of like a cyberpunk-esque look. I really enjoy how it looks, and I've got Gruvbox running, so it's like a vintage, but also somewhat futuristic look. I just really love how it looks, how I was able to configure it. You know, it just feels like you get the best of both worlds. And I guess that's kind of where I've settled in my Linux journey right now, where I enjoy configuring, but I don't want to have to configure everything from scratch. So I kind of am trying to find that middle path, you know, where I want something that can be configured but has good defaults. And for me, that's Void Linux with xfce and Awesome WM, or Window Manager. And on this desktop I'm using right now, I haven't configured Awesome yet, because I gave my main desktop that I used for about 3 or 4 years to one of my friends who's getting his master's, just because he needed a GPU. And for Black Friday, I got, I think, a 1-year-old, because it's 11th gen gaming laptop on sale. I think they didn't sell well, so they just started giving them away like hotcakes. And I was able to use it as a nice desktop. I unplugged the battery, I unscrewed it and everything, upgraded the RAM myself because I wanted to charge like something crazy for the RAM. So now I've got a decent desktop that I can record video on, I can video edit on because it has that GPU. And you know, NVIDIA was a bit annoying to configure at first, but nothing crazy, nothing unmanageable. I think even a novice could get it done pretty easily. And all in all, I'd say that I'm very happy with where I've settled. I love Arch. It taught me so much. And I still have it on an old Raspberry Pi that actually got me through about 2 weeks of university when I broke Arch on my laptop that I was using at the time. My old ThinkPad that I borrowed from my dad. And my MacBook at the time locked me out because I was in Korea and I didn't have access to my American phone number. So I couldn't use my MacBook, I couldn't use my ThinkPad, and I had to rely on my my Raspberry Pi for a little bit. But luckily I was able to get everything working again by installing Arch on a USB from the Raspberry Pi, putting it into the old ThinkPad, and then you know, the rest is history. But all in all, I'd say if you're learning Linux, the main thing is finding something that you can't necessarily break and just trying to use it as a daily driver. I kind of fell into the trap of ricing and going crazy. And I say it's a trap, but I think at the end of the day, if you go through it, it makes you better and you kind of come out the other side. It's like those memes of the bell curve like this, you know. You have a guy using xfce here, guy using xfce here than all the window managers here. But I still love window managers. I'm still going to use them. I think that Linux offers you an opportunity to really understand the operating system, but also the hardware and getting drivers to work. All in all, I'd say, very glad with my decision to switch to computer science. Very glad with my decision to not spend $130 on Windows. So that's today's video. A bit more long form, a bit of background on myself, my Linux journey, and I've pivoted more to kind of tutorial style videos than I thought I would. Initially, I thought it would be more Linux based. One of my YouTube icons, I guess, is the Mental Outlaw. I feel like my goal would be to be a more programming version of that, with the histogram overlap being Linux. All in all, that's the desktop setup. I'll be sure to do some videos about the framework if you guys want, and how Fedora works on it. The last video I did was on that. I'll put out some Rust pattern matching stuff soon. Just wanted to go over the Linux side of things. If you have any questions or think my takes are wrong, let me know. I'd be down to try some different operating systems in the future. All right, thank you guys.